Demon Slayer, a series which has redefined the limits of how good an anime could be. Its crazy impact in the anime and manga industry has left us all wondering, how in the world did it manage to topple the great One Piece for a while? From the plot all the way to the unique power system and the various intimidating antagonists, we were really blessed with this amazing franchise. With the return of the Demon Slayer anime, we are about to witness something incredibly special, with Ufotable constantly upping their game. I knew now would be the perfect time to finally create an extremely long timeline video, which will cost years off my life. But before we dive into this lengthy video, be sure to subscribe to the channel if you're new and hit that notification bell to stay updated with my latest uploads. This video will indeed contain every single spoiler in Demon Slayer. You have been warned. So how exactly will I break down every single date from Demon Slayer when there isn't any official information concerning the years that it was all based in? Well, we will be theorizing and estimating when the Demon Slayer timeline could have taken place. This monstrous video couldn't have been made possible without Demon Slayer's Tumblr posts, which involves their very accurate estimation of when the following events in Demon Slayer could have taken place. So be sure to check their posts out and give them a follow on Tumblr. I'll leave the link down in the description below. Anyways, what exactly will we be covering in this video? We'll be covering everything. Yes, you heard that right. We'll even be going through the guidance concerning both Tomioka and Kyojuro, which should be interesting. So enough of my rambling, let's uncover the entire story of Demon Slayer in order. So to begin this timeline video, we will need to go all the way back into the Heian period, or more specifically the 900s. This would be when Muzan is born into what would be the future Ubuyashiki clan, likely in the Heian capital, which is modern day Kyoto. Assuming that he was stillborn, he is then barely rescued from cremation, which was a sign of being born in a very high class nobility status. Muzan grows up sickly and has never had much regard for other people, seeing them as nothing more than just bugs. And from around the time he was human to shortly after turning into a demon, 5 of his wives committed suicide due to his harsh tongue. A doctor who lived around Mount Kumatori in the Kanto region uses the blue spider lilies that grow there to try to create a medicine to treat Muzan. Muzan, thinking the medicine isn't working, kills the doctor partway through treatment. It works, but he is no longer able to go in the sun. He never really had a thirst for blood, but instead was annoyed at the fact that the sun was his only true weakness. As for the Ubuyashiki clan, it's said that their family has a curse, and that is of course the illness which eventually kills them, and this supposedly stems from Muzan, in which they are determined to eliminate him once and for all. The next big step towards this timeline would come between the years of 1180 to 1185. This would be the end of the Heian period and commence the Genpei War. This sweeps Kyoto and many other parts of Japan into violence. Over the centuries thereafter, the seat of power switches from Kyoto to Kanto. At some point, Muzan had moved to Kanto, likely in search of the blue spider lilies, but possibly because Muzan likes being among those in power too. Swordsmen in the Demon Slayer Corps do not yet use the breathing styles and fight in whatever method they can. At some point, they begin using Nichirin blades because the ore soaks the sunlight, while their sword forms are already in reference to the basic breathing forms we understand later on. They are not yet using breathing techniques. The Demon Slayer Corps would be formed between the years, and the pillar system would be introduced. Muzan during these years would be in sole search of the blue spider lily. Almost 300 years later, we would then be introduced to the 2 biggest game changers in the Demon Slayer franchise, and that would be the birth of Yoriichi and Michikatsu Sugikuni in the year of 1460. So how did we come up with Yoriichi and Michikatsu being born in the year of 1460? Well, Tanjiro and company make reference to Yoriichi's era. They say over 300 years ago, but according to Kokushibo's recollection, he last met Yoriichi 400 years ago. That makes us a little too early for the Warring States Sengoku period, defined between the years of 1467 to 1615. It's also possible Kokushibo was rough in his estimation, so I'm splitting the difference and putting them at the early Sengoku period, giving Kokushibo 370 years since last meeting Yoriichi. The Onin War occurs between 1467 to 1477, plunging Japan into the Warring States period, as it is more technically defined, so we can assume a lot of the important events in the twins' early life took place in this period of chaos. I'm assuming based on the demon attacks at Mount Kumatori that Yoriichi, Michikatsu, Muzan, and the Ubuyashiki clan are already based in the Kanto region, which would be modern-day Tokyo. But a lot of the early heavy violence of this war took place in Kyoto. Anyways, around the early 1460s, twins were born to the Sugikuni clan, and during this time twins were seen to be a bad omen. Their father, worried about succession disputes, wants to have the second-born twin with a flame birthmark killed in order to avoid some tragedy that may strike their clan before they are the age of 2. But their normally very quiet mother, Akeno, puts a stop to that. She names that baby Yoriichi so that he may value relationships. Their father names the older one Michikatsu to value victory. The boys are raised in separate conditions, and the illness on Akeno's left side slowly progresses. Michikatsu feels bad for Yoriichi and brings him presents, including a handmade flute that doesn't work well. For years, Yoriichi is quiet as not to trouble his father, so he is assumed to be deaf. Akeno gives him the earrings when he is 7 and prays to a sun god to open his ears, at which point he says his first words, informing her that he can hear. Michikatsu is beaten by his father for going to play with Yoriichi, which Michikatsu insists he doesn't mind, but this leads to severe arguments between their parents. Still the age of 7, Yoriichi has been watching Michikatsu's sword lessons and is allowed a shot at one of the master swordsman trainers, to which Yoriichi very swiftly defeats with no prior experience of swordsmanship at all. Yoriichi has little interest in swordsmanship, but because Michikatsu asked, he explains how he sees the see-through world. This is when Michikatsu's jealousy begins. The year is now 1470. Yoriichi's father then favors Yoriichi over Michikatsu to take over the clan, to which their positions switch. Michikatsu would now be the one destined to leave for the temple and follow a monk's path. However, when they are 8 years old, the twins' mother, Akeno, dies at the age of 24. Yoriichi then decides to give his final farewell to his brother as he flees the household to supposedly go to the temple. This was all from Yoriichi's kindness and love he had towards his brother, who he knew wanted to take over the clan. So Yoriichi, regardless of being extremely talented, left and allowed Michikatsu to take the limelight. Their father loved Akeno very much, and he becomes distraught, for he never knew of her illness. As it was her wish to have the boys raised as equals, he tries to amend his ways and goes to the temple to try and bring Yoriichi back. But Yoriichi is nowhere to be found. But from Michikatsu's perspective, he thought that their father was desperate to bring Yoriichi back so the clan could be led by someone powerful. That same year, when Yoriichi had ran far away, he came across an orphan who was staring out into the distance on a rice field. Yoriichi approached this girl and asked what she was doing. She replied that her entire family was killed by a widespread disease. She came to take some tadpoles home since she was so lonely. She then releases the tadpoles back and Yoriichi is confused, asking why she's not taking them home. This mysterious girl replies that she would feel bad separating the tadpoles from their family. Yoriichi then tells her, "Then how about I go home with you?" With tears streaming down her face, this young girl turns around and Yoriichi compares her eyes to obsidian. That girl's name was Uta, and that is when Yoriichi would begin living with her. He mentioned how she always used to talk from night till day, and how it helped him understand other perspectives, and how the see-through world which he sees is something that no one else can really see. 10 years later, in the year of 1480, with Yoriichi and Uta both being 18 years of age, they decide to finally get married to each other. With Uta being in her last month of pregnancy, Yoriichi would go out to find a midwife in preparation for the birth. But along his way he stumbles across an old man trying to travel the mountains in order to visit his son who is wounded in battle. Struggling to do so, Yoriichi decides to help this old man meet his dying son. Yoriichi decides to bring the midwife the next day, but upon getting home he sees Uta gushing with blood, as her and their unborn child were ruthlessly murdered by a demon. Yoriichi would then spend 10 days straight holding on to his wife's corpse, until what would be the ancestor of the Rengoku family turning up. He was the one who had advised Yoriichi that they must have a proper burial to respect their souls. That is when Yoriichi understood who was responsible for their deaths and decided to join the Demon Slayer Corps. At this time, no one knew what breathing styles were, but the pillars at the time, as explained by Yoriichi, were excellent. Yoriichi then attempted to teach them the breath of the sun, which he cultivated, but it was far too difficult for them to pull off, hence leading to their own derivatives of the breath of the sun. This would birth the likes of wind breathing, mist breathing, flame breathing, and many more. This next time frame would be 1480-ish, meaning anything between 1480 till 1490. But around this time would be when Yoriichi would save Michikatsu's group from a stray demon. This would be the same demon to effortlessly kill all of Michikatsu's squadron. but in a single slash, Yoriichi would have this demon defeated. Michikatsu would then abandon his family to become a demon slayer, all because of his greed to become stronger than his brother. Michikatsu would then create a derivative known as moon breathing, but was annoyed with himself since he couldn't master the breath of the sun. Eventually, Michikatsu gained the mark like all the other pillars, and they had to pay with their lives. Anyways, during this time, which would still be around 1480-ish, a familiar couple would enter the frame. That would be Sumiyoshi and Suyako Kamado, as their story begins with the newlyweds coming across Yoriichi's old home on Mount Kumatori and moving in there. But during their time being there, it seemed they had rescued quite a few people on the mountain. They would refuse the money which they were offered because of their kind act, so the people instead decided to rebuild their house. One of the biggest reasons for this was because Sumiyoshi and Suyako had rescued a daimyo's wife and her son during a succession dispute, hiding them in the mountains. Their generosity would be paid back in a nicely renovated home. But a fate similar to Yoriichi's was on the verge of happening again. The Kamado couple would be attacked by a demon, and during this time Suyako was heavily pregnant. Luckily that day, Yoriichi was passing by his old home, where he and Uta used to live, and visit her grave. Yoriichi then saves them and kills the demon as he then urgently fetches the midwife for Suyako. Shortly after, their child Sumire is born the following day. Sumiyoshi already insists that he'll tell his future generations about Yoriichi, but Yoriichi sternly tells Sumiyoshi that he hasn't been able to save anyone, and not to see him as any kind of special person, and disappears. 2 years after Yoriichi had visited Sumiyoshi and Suyako for the very first time, which would still be during 1480-ish, that's when Michikatsu would be desperate to stay alive in his pursuit to become stronger than Yoriichi. He knew there was little to no time in his life due to him gaining the mark. That is when he seeks the Demon King himself, with the Muzan offering that he could stay alive for all eternity, owning his craft, and one day become stronger than Yoriichi ever was. Michikatsu selfishly takes up the offer, then becomes the Kokushibo that we know of today. His greed to become the strongest would be what drove Michikatsu to becoming a demon. Shortly after Michikatsu becomes a demon without Yoriichi's knowledge, in the year of 1480-ish, Yoriichi would face off against Muzan. Muzan during this time would be accompanied by Tamayo, but upon meeting Muzan, Yoriichi felt Muzan's malicious intent, comparing it to that of boiling magma from a volcano that is ready to explode. It was then he realized he was born with the skills and talent to defeat Muzan once and for all. Muzan stated that he had lost interest in swordsmen who employed breathing techniques, and then performed long sweeps of his arms to outright kill Yoriichi. He dodged them, but instantly realized any of those attacks would be fatal. Yoriichi for the very first time felt fear surging through his body. Seeing into the transparent world, Yoriichi saw that Muzan had 7 hearts and 5 brains, which changed positions within his body. Seeing his chance, he combined all his forms into a single attack, cutting through all of them and overpowering Muzan completely. Muzan was left in disbelief at his inability to regenerate while struggling to keep his head attached. Yoriichi asked him what he felt was the value of life, but didn't receive an answer. He turned to Tamayo, but was surprised to see her looking at her master's dismembered body with a hopeful gleam in her eyes. Moving to kill him once and for all, Yoriichi instead heard the sound of teeth cracking as Muzan's body burst into hundreds of small pieces. Caught off guard, he was only able to destroy 1,500 of the 1,800 pieces, leaving the rest to escape for Muzan to regenerate once again. In spite of Yoriichi's failure to kill him, Muzan never forgot the encounter and remained fearful of Yoriichi for the rest of his life. Right after this battle, the pillars would rush to Yoriichi and inform him that his brother Michikatsu had become a demon. Many people had told Yoriichi to commit seppuku since he allowed Tamayo and Muzan to escape and for his brother to become a demon. But the leader of the Ubuyashiki clan at the time, who was a 6-year-old, had stopped that from happening and exiled Yoriichi from the Demon Slayer Corps and gave him the task to kill his brother. After being kicked out of the Demon Slayer Corps, Yoriichi visits Sumiyoshi one fall, wanting to tell someone about his life. After sharing his story, he receives flower from Sumire, and at Suyako's request he performs the sun breathing. Sumiyoshi memorizes it by watching him, and promises to pass it down to his future generations. Yoriichi leaves him with the earrings his mother had given him, and keeps the toy flute from Michikatsu and a scrap of Uta's kimono. So now finally away from the 1480-ish, and 65 years later, the year would be 1545. This is when Yoriichi finally finds Kokushibo at the ripe age of 80 years old. This baffled Kokushibo, realizing that those with the mark typically die by the age of 25. However, Yoriichi smashed through that barrier and is still around the age of 80. During this time, Kokushibo would be classed as the Upper Moon One, and Muzan's strongest demon, Yoriichi understanding that he must kill his brother standing before him. In a single slash attack, an 80-year-old Yoriichi was able to slice the throat of Kokushibo's, which caused Kokushibo to go in a state of panic, and that was that he might actually die to Yoriichi. Kokushibo waited for the next attack, but Yoriichi would die while standing up from old age. So the only thing which saved Kokushibo was the fact that Yoriichi was in his dying days, angered that his one chance at a fair battle is gone, and the man who nearly killed Muzan and him is now dead and undefeated forever. Kokushibo would strike at his brother's corpse in anger, only to realize Yoriichi carried the flute he gifted to him when they were both still children. Unable to sever his connection with Yoriichi, Kokushibo took the split flute and carried it with him. The year is now 1690, and this would commence the birth of Hakuji, or also known as the Upper Moon 3 Akaza. It's debated between who was born first between Hantengu or Akaza, but from our calculations, we'll be going with Akaza. Anyways, it's understood that Hakuji was born in the slums of Edo, which would be modern-day Tokyo. Now, during the early 1700s, this would commence the birth of Upper Moon 4 Hantengu. Although nothing is known about his human name, he would go on to be one very deluded criminal in the later years of his life. 11 years later from the 1690s, which would be the 1700s from our rough estimation, this was when Hakuji, or as we know as Akaza, would be committing petty crimes. Hakuji as an 11-year-old was taking care of his sickly father, who he deeply loved, but they couldn't afford the medicine, so what Hakuji did was pickpocket people from the town, but was caught 3 times doing so. The magistrate beat him and marked him with tattoos, threatening to cut his arms off the next time he was caught and calling him a demon child. When Hakuji returned home after his 3rd beating, a villager informed him that his father, having heard of his arrest, hung himself. In the letter he left, he stated that he wanted Hakuji to live a full life and didn't want to take medicine if it was earned by dishonest means. With his criminal tattoos and no home to return to, Hakuji was eventually banished from Edo, devastated by the loss of his father and enraged at the society that they lived in, where he couldn't afford his father's medicine. He picked fights with people and beat them up. One day, after nearly killing 7 adult men in a village, he was approached by Keizo, the owner of a local dojo. Annoyed by the man's cheerful demeanor, Hakuji challenged him to a fight, but was defeated with ease. Keizo then took him in so he could nurse Koyuki, Keizo's sickly daughter. Her mother, her previous caretaker, drowned herself due to stress, and Keizo had to work handyman jobs to keep them afloat, so Hakuji was tasked with tending to her. Already accustomed to taking care of his father, he had little trouble, though he found it awkward when she burst into tears at random. One of those times, unbeknownst to him, he had indirectly motivated her by telling her that there will be a next year to see a local fireworks show. One day he discovered that Koyuki had been forced outside and left by the heir of the nearby Kenjutsu dojo, as they sought Keizo's land for themselves and prevented him from getting any students before Hakuji. Enraged, Keizo and Hakuji fought the dojo, and after defeating 9 people, Hakuji made them promise to never get involved with the Soryu dojo or Koyuki again. The heir of the rival dojo became enraged and swung a sword at Hakuji, only for him to use his bell splitter technique and punch the side of the blade, breaking it. The other members of the dojo were so moved by the beauty of this technique that they accepted their loss and apologized for their rudeness of the heir, leaving the Soryu dojo in peace. The year would be around 1707, with Akaza and Koyuki becoming really close, and with the dojo growing in numbers. Keizo decides to offer Hakuji to take over the dojo and also take Koyuki as his bride. Keeping in mind right now Akaza would be 18 years old, he agreed, silently vowing to protect both of them, even at the cost of his own life. At a festival, Koyuki told him of her past, asking if he was really okay with the proposal, to which he reaffirmed his vows to her, promising to protect her for the rest of his life. The heir of the rival dojo heard about Hakuji's marriage to Koyuki, so he gathered some angered disciples and fought Hakuji, but they lost. Tragically, this victory was short-lived. Hakuji went to visit his father's grave to inform him of his marriage, but quickly realized something wasn't right upon his return. A student from the dojo informed him that the rival dojo had poisoned the well where Koyuki and Keizo drank water from. The 2 died shortly after drinking the water while Hakuji was away. That same year of 1707, Hakuji would rock up to the rival dojo and kill all 67 members with his bare hands alone. He pulverized them to a point where they were no longer recognizable. This incident caught the Demon King Muzan by surprise. He was excited, thinking that one of his demons had created this mess, but found out it was all done by a mere human. He then forced Hakuji to become a demon and a part of the 12 demon moons, birthing the monster which we know as Akaza. A few years later, between 1715 to 1720, this is when we are introduced to Hantengu, who we mentioned previously. At this moment in time, Hantengu would be around the age of 15 or 20. Throughout most of his adult life, Hantengu committed many heinous crimes. He stole from numerous innocent people and murdered others in various towns and cities, all the while claiming that he was innocent, even once claiming that his hands alone were solely to blame for his actions, thus hinting that he was also mentally unstable and delusional due to his claims. He was even married several times and had children, but falsely believed he was being mistreated and killed his many wives and children in retaliation. Eventually, he was captured by a high-ranked magistrate and sentenced to death by decapitation, despite his outrageous claims of innocence, which were then silenced by threatening to cut off his sinful hands instead. While imprisoned and awaiting his execution, he was approached by Muzan, who offered to help him. After taking pity on his situation, Muzan proceeded to give him some of his blood, transforming him into a demon. Almost 40 years later, in 1763, this would commence the birth of the now Upper Moon 2, Doma. We also believe that Doma was also his human name, and he carried it on as a demon, but Doma would be born into a family that would take advantage of his looks. The year is now 1768, which would make Doma around 5 years old. He had extraordinary features, his rainbow-coloured eyes and pale hair led people to consider him special, and believed he could communicate with the gods. His parents, whom he considered extremely dim-witted, placed him as the head of a cult they formed, which became known as the Paradise Faith. Angry at his parents' low intelligence, he nonetheless played along and accepted his role. Despite this, he never once heard the gods' voices. Seated in an elaborately decorated room as the figurehead of the cult, Doma was met by numerous people and help for suffering they had in their lives. He considered these stories extremely boring and was confused why they came to a child for help. These people asked him to lead them to paradise, causing Doma to cry, since he never believed that paradise, the gods and Buddha were even real. To him, they were nothing more than a fantasy created by humanity, and he bemoaned that people believed in something so fictitious to him. Doma was also apathetic, being entirely unable to understand and feel human emotion. When he was still a child, his mother had a mental breakdown and stabbed his father to death for having numerous affairs with many other female cult followers. She committed suicide immediately afterwards by poisoning herself to death. However, despite these series of harrowing events happening right in front of him, Doma only felt annoyed by the bloody mess created in the aftermath, and was disgusted by the pungent smell of blood. He simply wanted to air out the room before the stench permanently stuck to the furniture. 9 years later, in the year of 1777, Daki and Gyutaro would be born with Daki's human name being Ume, but Gyotaro's name remaining the same even after becoming a demon. Anyways, they were born in the entertainment district's Rashomangasi area, which would be the lowest caste area, essentially where sick and retired geishas were sent to die. Her biological father is never mentioned, but was likely one of her mother's customers. Her brother noted their mother to be severely mentally unstable, most likely due to the district's extremely harsh living conditions, having attempted to kill herself and her son numerous times. Between the years of 1780 and 1800, this is when we predicted the birth of Nakime and Gyokko to be around, due to the fact that Muzan had all the upper moons gathered by no later than the 1810s. 20 years after Doma's birth, which would now be 1783, this is when a 20-year-old Doma would seek Muzan, who then transformed him into a demon. Doma would continue to lead the cult, only with a new mission. He became convinced that it truly was his mission to help people into paradise, and did so by devouring his followers. To him, paradise and the cease of pain can be found if he devours them, and their deaths at his hand meant that they will suffer no more pain. Doma continued this twisted ambition for the most of his life. Between the years of 1785 and 1790, we understand more about the past of Daki and Gyutaro. It's said that Gyutaro was born a few years earlier than Daki due to his mom residing in the ruins of the entertainment district. He was subject to a lot of abuse. Gyutaro was seen as ugly and was treated poorly. Throughout his childhood, he was berated for his appearance, voice, and poor hygiene by the other residents of the district. Without money and food, he was forced to eat insects and mice, which he killed with his only toy, a customer's forgotten sickle. When his sister Ume was born, he gained a sense of pride and acted as her collector within the district, whereas Ume was seen as the complete opposite of Gyutaro, and was seen as extremely beautiful, so she was then taken into a high-end brothel. But she wasn't viewed as any other geisha, since she was paid a lot of money for her looks alone. This allowed Gyutaro to keep collecting money and pay off the debts to the brothel and to hope for a better life for himself and his sister. The year is now 1790, and this is when things would completely change for Gyutaro and Ume, when one night a customer of Ume would insult Gyutaro to her face. Ume in anger decides to stab the samurai with her hairpin in his eye, and enraged, the owner of the brothel and the samurai tie up Ume and completely burn her. This is when Gyutaro seeks for his sister, but when he arrives he sees nothing but a burnt body before him, quickly realizing that it was his sister. In a moment of rage, Gyutaro effortlessly murders both the brothel owner and the samurai with his sickles, and carries his sister's body across the entertainment district, seeking for help. This is when they come across the then Upper Moon 6, Doma. He pities the pair and turns them into demons. This then births the demon sibling duo known as Daki and Gyutaro. For those wondering what Doma was doing in the entertainment district, he was simply eating women and sending them to paradise. Now moving into the early 1800s, this is where we'll dissect the past of both Nakime and Gyokko during their times as humans. This is because their human years would have taken place in the early 1800s. So we'll be starting off with Nakime. She was an obscure amateur biwa musician struggling to make ends meet, but the man she married was hopelessly addicted to gambling, who squandered her earnings and savings while contributing nothing to improve their lives. One night she was scheduled to go play her biwa at a particular stage, but discovered that her husband stole her performing dress and gambled it away. Enraged, Nakime murdered her husband using a hammer. Shortly after she killed her husband, Nakime realized that the appointed time to play was fast approaching, and she was forced to wear a worn-out, ragged dress as she left to her stage in haste. However, the crowd did not appreciate her shabby looks, and with the traumatic sensation of committing the murder for the first time still fresh in her mind, her hands shook in nervousness as she played her biwa. But surprisingly, the sound coming from the biwa as Nakime played with the utmost tension was so beautiful that her audience loved her performance and shouted for an encore. Both her customers and the stage owner were pleased with the unexpected outcome, and Nakime was paid handsomely. Since then, Nakime developed a disturbing habit of killing people before performing for large audiences. Strangely, every time she played her biwa in the aftermath of committing murders, her performance received extraordinary positive feedback from customers and stage managers. During a fateful day, she had a routine appointment to perform at another stage, so chose someone to kill, but this target was Yoriichi Muzan. Muzan was impressed with Nakime's searching skills, so he spared her life and offered to make her a demon. Nakime accepted his offer, became a demon and climbed the ranks and became one of Muzan's top servants. Next up is the former Upper Moon 5, Gyokko, his past opening up why he became the thing he is now. Managi, as he was known whilst he was a human, was born and lived in a village at the edge of a coastline. It was a village known for its fishing. When he was young, his parents went out on a fishing trip and never returned, as they would end up drowning far out at sea. After some time, their mangled corpses washed up and appeared on the village's shore. Upon seeing his parents' bodies, Managi developed a grotesque fascination with corpses. Villagers would often see him obsessing over fish carcasses he found, leading the entire community to ostracize him and keep their distance, believing Managi had gone insane. Eventually, a child found Managi and teased him for his unusual behavior, leading Managi to kill the child and stuff the body in a pot used for fishing. When the child's parents discovered them dead and Managi had been responsible, they stabbed him with a pronged fishing spear and left him to die on the spot. For 12 hours, Managi would barely stay alive as his wounds would eat his life away, up until he was discovered by Yoriichi Muzan and transformed into a demon. The years are now between 1840 till 1850, to which we believe that within these years that Jigoro Himejima, Zenitsu's teacher and the former Thunder Pillar, as well as Sakonji Urokodaki, Tanjiro and Tomioka's teacher, and also the former Water Pillar were born. This makes somewhat sense, since they would be around their 60s or 70s when the final battle took place. 10 years later in the 1860s, this would be when Shinjuro Rengoku would be born, due to the fact that in the ufotable original episode about Kyojuro on his way to the Mugen Train, Fuku's grandmother says that they were saved 20 years ago. In her flashback, Shinjuro is wearing the Flame Pillar Hayori, and we've assumed that Shinjuro was around the ages of 21 to 27 when he had become the Flame Pillar. So if you take that into account, Shinjuro would be in his mid-40s when the final battle happens. Now we'll be giving you guys some accurate dates, with this one taking place on August 23rd of 1889. This would mean the birth of Gyomei Himejima. Nothing is known about Himejima's parents, other than he was an orphan who lived at the temple. 3 years later in 1892, this would commence the birth of Kagaya Ubuyashiki, the one who was in charge of the Demon Slayer Corps until the final arc of Demon Slayer. He was responsible for gathering the current pillars together, which would go on to decide the fate of the world. That same year in 1892, but on October 31st, Tengen Uzui would be born into a family of 9 children within a shinobi clan. 3 of the 9 children died before they even reached 10 years old due to the extreme training. 2 years later, on February 8th, 1894, this would be the birth date of the water pillar Giyu Tomioka. Nothing is known about Tomioka's parents, but we do know that he grew up alongside his sister. A few months later, on September 15th, 1894, we would bear witness to the birth of Obonai Iguro. Obonai was born into a clan of thieves who lived off the riches that had been stolen from those who had been killed by a demon that they worshipped. 2 months later, on November 21st of 1894, this would commence the birth of the wind pillar, Sanemi Shinazugawa. Sanemi was the eldest son of 7 children and lived with both of his parents. The date is unknown for this one, but we do know it took place in 1894, and that is the birth of the former insect pillar, Kanai Kocho. She was born into a wealthy family and lived a privileged life with her sister. 1 year later on May 10th, 1895, Ruka Rengoku would give birth to Kyojuro Rengoku, being the first child of the flame pillar. However, his mother would die from an illness in the later years, but Kyojuro would train alongside his little brother Shinjuro. In 1896, at the mere age of 4 years old, Kagaya Ubuyashiki would become the leader of the Demon Slayer Corps due to his father dying of a cursed illness. This was common in the Ubuyashiki clan, with the leader growing younger and younger as the years went by. On June 1st, 1896, the love pillar Mitsuri Kanroji would be born. She was born among 5 siblings and had abnormal strength even as a child. She grew up eating much more than the average person and developed an unnatural hair color as a result of eating lots of sakura mochi. 1 year later, on February 24th, 1897, the Kocho family would introduce a new member, and that would be Shinobu Kocho. She would go on to succeed her sister as the insect pillar in the later years. 2 years after this, on January 7th, 1899, Sanemi would be getting a new sibling, and that would be Genya Shinazugawa. A few months later, on May 19th, 1899, Kanao Suyuri would be introduced into the world of Demon Slayer. However, Kanao would be living in extremely poor conditions, with her parents abusing her and her siblings. 2 months later, on July 14th, 1899, the main character of Demon Slayer would be born. That is of course Tanjiro Komodo, being the eldest amongst 5 siblings, and his parents being charcoal sellers. Being the eldest, he believed he must endure any hardships to make life easier for his siblings. Again, a couple months later, on September 3rd, 1899, our favorite lightning boy would be born, and that is Zenitsu Agatsuma. However, Zenitsu wasn't raised by his parents, so it's unknown who raised him in his earlier years. 1 year later, on April 22nd, 1900, Inosuke Hashibira would be born. However, he had an abusive father, to which his mother went to seek help of a cult leader who she thought would protect them, until she discovered that this cult leader was in fact a demon known as Doma. His mother would attempt to escape by throwing Inosuke off a cliff, but he would survive and would then be raised by boars. Again, 1 year later, on August 8th, 1901, twins would be born into the world known as Muichiro and Yuichiro Tokito. Their father was a woodcutter, as the pair had both lived up in the mountains with their parents. This is where the pieces to the puzzle would begin to fit. The year is now 1906, and this is when Obonai Iguro's backstory began. What we understand is that Obonai Iguro was born into a family of thieves which worshipped a demon. However, this family was full of women, and it was rare for a male to be born into this clan. As the first boy born into the family for 370 years, Obonai Iguro lived at the beginning of his life locked in a wooden cage, being excessively spoiled by his family, who insisted on bringing him so many plates of rich food that he became sick of it due to the overly pungent odours, as well as the poor ventilation of his room. The serpent demon also took a liking to Obonai, since he was a rare male child, as he would then spend nights slithering around his cage in the dark and staring at him, which frightened Obonai so much that he couldn't sleep until the noises were gone. When he turned 12, Obonai was finally allowed to leave his cell for the first time in his entire life. He was taken into a room that appeared to be an expensive shrine, and put face to face with the serpent demon for the first time, immediately causing him to shake in fear and terror at the demon's appearance and the realization that this was the very same thing slithering in his room, staring at him every night of his life. The demon remarked that Obunai was very small and decided that she should wait to eat him when he was bigger. She ordered that his mouth to be cut wider all the way to his ears, to match hers due to her liking to him. The blood that he shed from this procedure was then collected into a chalice that she then drank from. Imprisoned back into his cell, with his wound now covered by a bandage, Obunai began only to think of an escape and survival upon realizing his fate. He began to scratch away at the lattice of his cell with a stolen hairpin that he took from one of his relatives that he would then use during the night in order to prevent anyone from noticing his attempt to escape. Day by day he would be in a constant state of worry and fear, shaking in terror at the possibility of what would happen if the serpent demon or his family would discover his attempt at freedom. The only thing then that he could trust was a small snake that had somehow strayed into his cage and became his only friend, Kaburomaru. Eventually Obunai finally managed to completely remove a wooden chunk of the bars and escape into the night. As he ran, the serpent demon began to pursue him, almost catching up to him and killing him before the flame Hashira Shinjuro Rengoku by chance came to his rescue. Because of Obunai's escape, the serpent demon had killed nearly all 50 of his relatives. The only surviving member of his bloodline was his cousin, who had also been saved by the Hashira. When they were reunited, however, she rejected him and began to violently attack and claw at him due to her blaming him for their family's death at the hands of the demon due to them messing up and allowing him to escape, screaming at him that he should have just let her eat him. Due to these harsh words from his cousin and his own sense of self-loathing and guilt for having been born into such a family and allowing them to die for his survival, Obunai joined the Demon Slayer Corps and decided to turn all his rage onto whatever demons he could find, believing that he would feel like a better person if he risked his life for the sake of others and somehow ease his guilt. Despite this, he constantly felt as if his dead family would continue to drag him down despite the good he accomplished as a demon slayer, and his lingering self-loathing would haunt him every day. The same year of 1906 would also be when Sanemi's tragic past would occur. One day, Sanemi's mother failed to return home, so Sanemi left to search for her. At some point, he found her and realized she became a demon, but couldn't stop her from returning home and killing 5 of his siblings. Just before she could kill Genya, however, Sanemi tackles her through the window to the street below with a knife in his hand. In the ensuing fight, she gave him the 2 large scars across his face and his Merechi blood, which disorients demons and makes them act intoxicated. This gave him an opening to cut her down. When Genya runs into the street to find a doctor for his grievously injured siblings, he finds Sanemi with their mother lying dead at his feet, panicking and not knowing that the wolf that attacked them was their demonified mother. Genya screams and accuses Sanemi of murdering her. Sanemi, still in shock, became partially colorblind as their mother dissolved in the sunlight. This would then cause Sanemi to abandon Genya. 1 year later, in 1907, Himejima's past would also come to light. Before Gyomei was a demon slayer and a Hashira, he lived with 9 children who were orphans and raised them in a temple. The area was well known for demon attacks, so Gyomei had always burned wisteria incense to ward off any demons that would harm him and the children. One night, one of the 9 children disobeyed the temple rules and traveled beyond its borders. He is immediately stopped by a demon, and in order to save his own life, he tells the demon to eat the other children as well as Gyomei. Once it became night, the child invited the demon into the temple after putting out the wisteria incense. 4 children were immediately killed by the demon, and the remaining children insisted on escaping the temple. Ignoring Himejima's orders, his frail stature and blindness fueled the distrust the children had in Himejima's ability to protect them, which led them to abandon him and ultimately getting killed by the demon. In the end, only one child, the youngest, Sayo, had listened and stayed behind in fear of the demon. Though it is unknown how the exchange went down, Himejima had been cut across the forehead by the demon, but soon reversed the situation and began attacking the demon mercilessly after realizing he had a frightening amount of power. He went on and beat the demon's head until the sun arose. Soon after, people came to the scene of the incident to help, but due to a misunderstanding with Sayo saying the man is a monster, he killed everyone, the villagers thought she meant Himejima and not the demon. He was later imprisoned and charged with murder of the 7 children till Kagaya Ubuyashiki intervened and released him before he would have been executed for his false crimes. Later on, Himejima became a demon slayer, and after only 2 months, he became the Stone Hashira. That same year of 1907, this would give us an insight behind the true past of Tengen Uzui. Tengen was born into a family of 9 children within a shinobi clan. 3 of the 9 children died before they even reached 10 years old due to the overzealous training. With the remaining 6 of his siblings, they were forced to kill each other on their father's orders, without them knowing who they fought, as their heads and faces were covered with masks. Tengen realized his father's trick only after he killed 2 of his brothers. By the age of 15, 7 of his siblings had already died, leaving only him and his younger brother, who is 2 years younger. As children, his father had forced them to undergo harsh and intensive training as an attempt to save the clan, and influenced them to believe they needed to dispose of innocent lives for their benefit, and solely having a wife as a means for producing offspring. As his last remaining brother adopted this mindset and did not feel bad about killing their other siblings, Tengen became appalled and decided to leave the clan permanently. He left the village with his wives without fighting his brother. Uzui's family practices polygyny, so when Tengen had turned 15, he must have 3 wives, who were chosen by the head of the clan. After leaving the village with his wives, he would later teach them to value themselves. For a while after he had left the clan, it became a habit for him to say that he was going to hell, but he stopped after Makio got angry with him, Hinatsuru cried, and Suma bit him. He anguished over whether he should have exterminated the Uzui clan, but he couldn't bring himself to kill his father or brother. Another backstory which takes place in 1907 would also be Giyu Tomioka. Tomioka grew up alongside his older sister, Sutako. When he was still a child, his sister sacrificed herself to protect him from the demons. After the death of Sutako, Giyu tried to tell the others that she was killed by a demon. However, he was labeled as mentally ill and was sent away to one of his relatives, a doctor. Tomioka ran away during the journey there and almost died on a mountain. But he was rescued and he became an apprentice under Sakonji Urokodaki. He was 13 years old when he met Sabito whilst training under Urokodaki, and they became good friends due to their similar paths and age. Together they entered the final selection exam on Mount Fujikasane. Giyu was injured after a demon's attack and was saved by Sabito, who defeated nearly every demon on the mountain. However, after the week went by, it was revealed to Tomioka that Sabito was the only one who died during their selection. 3 years later in 1910, Tengen Uzui would then become the Sound Hashira. He would go on to climb the ranks of the Corps and became the Sound Hashira before Sanemi Shinazugawa became a pillar, and when Kanai Kocho was still a member. 1 year later in 1911, Kanao Suyuri would enter the frame of Demon Slayer. Her parents were incredibly abusive towards her and her siblings, beating them and drowning them if they did anything they disliked. Even crying or making sounds of pain would result in a punishment by the parents. She recalled how one morning several of her brothers' bodies felt cold, roughly implying that they had died from a beating the evening before. She broke down psychologically because of this, becoming an empty shell who was eventually sold off into slavery. As she was being led off, tied around the waist by a rope, held by a purchaser, they were approached by the Kocho sisters. After confirming she was a slave, Shinobu distracted the man by flinging money in the air. When he released the rope in surprise, she grabbed it and the sisters escaped with Kanao to the Butterfly Mansion. Soon after, the sisters discover the extent of her trauma, which makes Shinobu view her as useless, if not potentially dangerous. Kanai, however, gives Kanao a coin and instructs her to flip it if she ever needs help making a decision. Unfortunately, that same year of 1911 would mean the death of Kanai Kocho. Kanai ran into the Upper Moon 2 Doma. She was fatally wounded during the encounter, but he was forced to flee from the rising sun before he could even devour her. As she lay dying in Shinobu's arms, she tries to convince her sister to leave the Demon Slayer Corps to live a normal life, but her sister is dead set on avenging her. With the last of her strength, Kanai described Doma to Shinobu before succumbing to her wounds. The year is now 1912. Prior to this, Moichiro and Yuichiro had lost both their parents, with their mother dying of her illness and their father dying in the wintry mountains when he attempted to get medicine for her. This resulted in him falling off the cliff and dying. Anyways, the 2 orphan siblings survived together, with Moichiro taking after the emotional and kind nature of their father. Contrary to him, Yuichiro held a cold and impassive outlook on life. In the following spring, Kagaya Ubuyashiki's wife, Amane Ubuyashiki, arrived to recruit the twins for the Demon Slayer Corps. Moichiro's excitement was opposed by Yuichiro's unwelcoming and rejecting reception. In an outburst, Yuichiro revealed that he blamed the death of their parents on their hardworking and selfless natures, which led to him adopting his cold demeanor, hoping that it would keep himself and his brother alive. While Amane continued to visit the twins, Yuichiro chased her away each time. In the following summer, when the twins were 11, a demon arrived at their cabin during the night and attacked. resulting in Yuichiro losing his left arm while trying to protect Muichiro. As the demon badgered them for their worthlessness, Muichiro lost himself in rage and destroyed the demon with all the tools at their disposal. Afterwards, Muichiro would lose his memories and leave his old life behind to serve the Demon Slayer Corps. Due to his prominent strength and highly extensive training, he quickly rose to the rank of a Hashira in a mere 2 months. With his memories gone, Muichiro began taking after his older brother's personality and became aloof and different. However, he always felt an incredible anger deep inside him, which drove him to hunt the demons. During this period in the Demon Slayer Corps, he also met Kyojuro Rengoku, who told him that they should do the best they could as fellow Hashira. Additionally, Muichiro became acquainted with his late swordsmith, Tetsuido, who expressed an understanding and empathy towards the boy and his harsh circumstances. Now we'll be moving on to Tomioka's famous Gaiden and figuring out when it had taken place. Well, we predicted that it took place between the years of 1912 till 1913. The story opens on Giyu Tomioka standing in front of a demon, who is clutching a woman he had been midway through eating. The demon begs Tomioka to spare him, but as he draws his Nichiren blade, Tomioka responds that they both know begging for his life is pointless. Panicking, the demon drops the woman's body and starts to back away from Tomioka. He then lunges towards him, screaming that he'll never eat a human again. With one swift movement, Tomioka beheads him with a water-breathing form. Just as he begins to put his blade back in its sheath, a crow flies overhead, telling Tomioka to head to the snowy mountains and investigate the recent deaths that have occurred there due to a demon. Meanwhile, at the northern post town, Shinobu Kocho is conversing with an old woman about a bear who hasn't entered hibernation that had been eating many of the Matagi mounted hunters from their village. Shinobu says it's no wonder, since she'd been feeling that the air around them had felt quite tense. The woman tells Shinobu that she should head back quickly, but the Hashira explains that she's actually free right now and that dealing with a bear that has eaten humans is very much within her line of work anyway. Shinobu asks the woman if there's anything else she can tell her about the subject, but a cry from outside cuts her off before she can say anything. A man from the village is shouting at a young girl for going into the mountains alone again, and the girl is protesting that she wasn't alone because she had Taro, her dog. Shinobu asks what's going on, and the woman explains that the girl's name is Yae, the daughter of a Matagi hunter named Matazo. The girl had apparently witnessed her father and friend's death after they'd been attacked by the rumored bear, and ever since then she'd been heading into the mountains to attempt to seek vengeance. Shinobu watches as the gun hanging from Yae's back is suddenly grabbed by a man who's approached her from behind, and the girl whips around shouting at the man to not touch her gun and attempting to deliver a blow to him with her right elbow. Her arm is stopped by the man, who is revealed to be Tomioka. Tomioka begins to introduce himself, saying he's with the Demon Slayer Corps and requesting that Yae tell him what she knows about the demon that had been rampaging around the village. Confused, the nearby villagers mutter that it was a bear and not a demon, and asks what he's talking about. Shinobu knocks her head onto the wall in frustration. One villager asks Tomioka if he's a policeman, but he says again that he's a demon slayer, to which the villager asks him, to his denial, if he's a political official. He's asked about the Nichiren sword hanging at his waist, which he produces, lying it on the floor and introducing himself once again as a demon slayer as he gets down on one knee. Worried, the villagers ask each other if they should call the police, and then one pipes up, saying that Tomioka could be the culprit responsible for murdering a family of coal burners, since the prime suspect for that case also wore a half-and-half Hayori. Shocked, one villager points a gun at Tomioka as others fetch rope to tie him up, and that's when Shinobu begins to approach the scene. She walks up behind Tomioka, poking his arm and exclaiming what a coincidence it is for her to see him out there. She says she's glad to see him and that he's awful at talking, and offers to explain the situation for him, but Tomioka says he can handle it himself. As the villagers begin tying him up, Yae starts to speak, saying that she doesn't know what he wants, but then falls to the floor before she can finish her sentence. Shinobu inspects her, saying she has a fever, and asks Tomioka to help her out. Tomioka breaks out the ropes that had been binding him, asking if she's sure, to which she replies that she might as well help out, since demon extermination is her job after all. While unconscious, Yae starts to dream of her childhood. She's playing outside with her dog as her father and another man discuss indoors the fact that Yae wants to become a Matagi. Her father, Matazo, says that he told her hunting is a game and that he's never heard of a female Matagi before. But the other man argues that Yae must be lonely at home since there aren't any other kids for her to play with. He says that she just wants to be with Matazo, asking him to understand her feelings. Matazo exits the house and walks up to Yae and Taro, saying that if she messes around with the gun he's taking it back. and Yae smiles widely. Yae's childhood flashback ends and another begins, showcasing the time Yae found her family and friends who had been murdered. She gasps, asking how and why this could happen, and then looks up and sees someone eating one of the bodies, calling father out to him. Yae and her father's eyes meet, but all she sees is a man-eating bear. When Yae awakens, she finds herself in a bed in the pharmacy on the other side of the village. She opens her eyes to find Shinobu sitting close to her, bending down with her face near her, and she blushes and cries out when she sees her. Yae sits up and moves away, clutching her gun, and Shinobu laughs, asking her please to not shoot her. Shinobu explains the situation, telling Yae her location and the fact that she was unconscious for half a day, then offering her herbal medicine and saying that she can't avenge anyone while in her current state. Yae takes the medicine thinking what's in it, but Shinobu just tells her to drink it. Meanwhile, in the other room, Tomioka is sitting with Taro. He reaches out to pat the dog, but he bites down on his hand, not letting go even when Tomioka panics and starts to shake it. As Tomioka and Taro struggle further, Yae calls out to her dog, telling him to stop it and apologizing, since he's usually good with people. Shinobu says not to worry, because Tomioka is just one of those people. Shinobu then turns to Yae, offering her condolences for the girl's father's passing, and asking her if she could question her about the incident. She explains that whatever attacked them could be a demon, and then Tomioka, with Taro still attached to him, interrupts and says that he should do the explaining. Shinobu reminds him that he's being attacked, and after some protesting from him, Shinobu gets Tomioka to back off. Yae and Shinobu's conversation continues, and after telling Shinobu what she knows about the bear, Yae says it's her turn to ask questions. She asks what a demon is and what demon slayers are, to which Shinobu explains the basics of what makes a demon, including the regeneration, strength, lifespan, and the 2 ways to kill it, and the demon slaying core that purges demons from the world. Yae asks if they slaughter demons, and Shinobu tells her not to phrase it like they're executing people, since all they're doing is ridding the world from evil demons. Shinobu then says that she must have been wrong about Yae's case, since the attacker seems to genuinely be a bear, but still offers her and Tomioka's help to hunt the bear. Yae simply says that she's a Mitagi, so she can do her own avenging. Yae then gets ready to leave, thanking Shinobu for taking care of her and ignoring the Hashira's protest that she still needs to rest. As she makes her way towards the door of the pharmacy, Tomioka walks over to her and stands before her. He advises her not to walk around at night, but Yae hot-headedly replies that there aren't any demons around and there's nothing wrong with a Mitagi shooting down a pest. Tomioka asks her why she's going into the mountains to avenge someone and asks her if she's hiding something from them. Yae shouts out that he's annoying and pushes past him to get to the door. Just before she's gone, Tomioka tells her that at the very least, he's never seen a demon turn back to a human. As Yae ventures out onto the snowy mountains with Taro, crouching down and paying her respects at the pile of sticks that used to be her home, Shinobu begins to discuss the case with Tomioka through the wall dividing the 2 rooms, Shinobu bringing up the subject of den-deprived bears that are unable to find a den in the winter and so aren't able to go into hibernation. She calls them sorrowful creatures lacking a home or family, who prowl the mountains at night. Shinobu then opens a door partitioning the rooms, appearing dressed in her core uniform, and tells Tomioka that if they leave her alone, she won't be saved. In the meantime, Yae and Taro keep walking. Yae tells her dog to follow the smell, crouching down next to him, stroking him and telling him to keep pushing despite the freezing cold. Yae remembers her father again, and the time that he spent teaching her the skills needed to become a Mitagi. They were sitting next to a bear they had just taken down, and her father was telling Yae never to waste a part of a bear because every part was a blessing of the mountain. He says that they as Mitagi live off what the mountain gives them, and that because they kill, they have to live. The flashback ends and Taro begins barking at something running off ahead of Yae to investigate it. She calls after him and then sees something fly back towards her and fall onto the snow. Shocked, she realizes it's Taro's decapitated head and moves on forward to reach the top of the hill. On the other side, she sees a figure. Yae knows immediately that it's the man that was once her father, bent over the corpse of Taro, and thinking to herself that he really did become a demon. Readying her gun, Yae remembers the shooting lessons her father gave her, getting into position to fire at him. She thinks about how she wanted it to be a mistake, and the fact that she lied about her demon father being a man-eating bear, but Taro's death was the last straw. Yae pulls the trigger, blowing her father's head off. As the demon begins to recover, regenerating his head and running towards her, she asks in her mind how he became a demon and why he had to kill everyone. Aiming her gun at him, she silently asks why he fled from their house like he was running away. Matazo jumps on Yae, pinning her down, and she slams her gun side on in his mouth to gag him. Yae thinks that she will shoot him if he can't turn back, and then asks him aloud as she begins to cry why he didn't eat her as well that day. The demon begins to say something and suddenly is leaped on from behind. Tomioka appears, swinging his sword at the demon, who leaps away from Yae, one arm severed. He stands between Yae and the demon, Shinobu standing behind them both and whispering to Yu's over her shoulder what a coincidence this was. Yae thinks back to the first time she went hunting and her father helped her out, but said it was the only time he would do so, saying she had to learn how to do it herself. She happily says she knows and quotes a line her father used to say that because they killed they had to live, and her father had nodded approvingly. Back in the present, her father is now a demon who had lost his left arm and foot, struggling to make his way towards her and the two Hashira, Tomioka and Shinobu, in the harsh snow. Yae looks on in horror and Tomioka tells Shinobu to look after her as he moves forward to deal with the threat. Shinobu jauntily asks Tomioka if he is sure and offers to kill the demon with her poison as she draws her blade. The words carved into the side of the blade strike fear into Yae, and she asks both of the Hashira to wait. Shinobu looks at her in shock and Tomioka asks her what the matter is now, saying that she knows that the demon in front of them was no longer the father that she used to know. The demon begins to regenerate his lost limbs and Tomioka charges at him to finish off the attack. Attacking the water Hashira, the demon grows a projectile of his own bone and throws it at Tomioka, who shatters it with a block from his blade. This was but a diversionary tactic. However, as the demon uses time to get close to Tomioka and attempted to stab him with a sharp outgrowth of bone from his forearm, Tomioka is able to dodge the attack, but Yae looks on with horror and dismay as he beheads her father with the water-breathing fourth form, striking Tide, killing him. The dismembered head weakly mutters something as it remembers Yae in his final moments, and Tomioka is puzzled but declares that it's over. Shinobu looks at Yae in concern as the girl repeats those words and points her hunting rifle at her throat. Tomioka tells Shinobu and rushes forward to protect Yae. Shinobu worries that she won't be able to get there in time, but miraculously Yae's rifle jams and Shinobu tackles her before she is able to pull the trigger. Yae begins to cry and asks why they won't let her do so. Shinobu looks at her with a pained and sorrowful expression. Crying that she has lost everything now, including her home, she says that the demon slayers don't understand a thing for them to leave her alone. Tomioka walks up to her and tells her that her father's final words were probably meant for her, and that before passing he had whispered simply, "Live." Still crying and utterly confused, Yae breaks into a smile and can only exclaim at Tomioka's words, saying that he does not care about her grumbles about demons as it has nothing to do with him. Tomioka then walks off. Shinobu calls for him but he continues to trudge off and tells her not to forget that they are Hashira. Disapproving and unable to leave the girl without some words of comfort, Shinobu tells her to bear with her feelings as that was how the rest of them had managed to continue on as well. As the Hashira leaves and snow stops, Yae looks on at the serene landscape and picks up the hunting rifle and notices that there are bloodstains all over the trigger. She realizes that her father's blood had hardened on it, preventing the trigger from being pulled earlier when she attempted to commit suicide. The sun comes out and the blood begins to disintegrate. In the light, Yae smiles as she ponders over the words of her father and the final message passed on by Tomioka, hugging the rifle as she watches the sunrise. Meanwhile, Tomioka thinks back to training with Sakonji Urokodaki, who had told him not to waver, saying that the water breathing was a style that could adapt to any attack, but that to master it he would need to have the heart to always keep his breath steady, like the water's reflection. As Tomioka and Shinobu eat ramen at a restaurant, she notes down that he has changed, telling him she had always believed he was cold to the bone, but that she sensed his concern for Yae as he spoke to her before leaving, saying he can confide in her. Anyways, with that lengthy guide uncovered, the year is still between 1912 to 1913, and this is when Sanemi would become the Wind Hashira. After having left Genya, Sanemi decides to wander around and to hunt demons. He eventually met a legitimate demon slayer, Masachika Kumeno, who helped him and introduced him to a proper trainer. Upon completing his training, the two of them teamed up to defeat the then lower rank 1 of the 12 demon moons. However, Kumeno lost his life in that battle, and only Sanemi was promoted to the rank of a Wind Hashira. At the time of his promotion, Himejima, Tengen and Tomioka were already Hashira. Bitter over Kumeno's death, Sanemi takes his anger out on Kagaya, accusing him of happily giving orders from above while the demon slayers bleed and die for his cause. To his surprise, Kagaya takes the criticism gracefully before mentioning Kumeno by name. Ubuyashiki has memorized the names and backgrounds of every single demon slayer who has died since he became leader. This discovery and reading Kumeno's will given to him by Ubuyashiki gives Sanemi a newfound respect for the leader of the demon slayer corps. Afterwards, he is scolded by his fellow Hashira, with Tomioka just watching from a distance. The year is now 1913, between the dates of 2nd and 5th of February. This is when tragedy strikes the Kamado family. On a snowy morning, Tanjiro prepares to leave for the nearby town and sell charcoal in preparation for the new year. However, his younger sister Hanako Kamado and brother Shigeru hold him back, begging for him to bring them along. Their mother intercepts and tells them how Tanjiro wouldn't be able to carry them if they were tired, but upon arriving at the town, Tanjiro holds a friendly conversation with all the townsfolk, and some ask for his help to perform some errands. After spending the afternoon at the town, Tanjiro begins to make his way back home, but is suddenly stopped by a man named Saburo. Saburo requests that the boy stay at his house for the night and warns him of the dangers in the mountains. Although Tanjiro tries to deny the offer, Saburo continues pushing and emphasizes that demons are active during the night. Tanjiro finally relents and listens to Saburo talk about demons as he falls asleep. When Tanjiro makes his way back home the next day, he returns to see an unconscious and wounded Nezuko lying in the snow and shielding Rokuta with her arms. Devastated, he realizes that the entirety of his family had been slaughtered, except for Nezuko. Tanjiro picks her up while attempting to carry her to the nearest doctor, discovers that she has been transformed into a demon and is promptly attacked by her. Tanjiro struggles to fend off his demon-turned sister and is overwhelmed by her strength, narrowly managing to block her attack with the handle of his hatchet. As Nezuko begins to grow in size and overpower him, Tanjiro internally apologizes to his family for the suffering they must have felt during their last moments and begs his sister to retain her humanity. Upon hearing her brother's words, Nezuko begins to cry. The siblings are suddenly interrupted by the arrival of Giyu Tomioka, who attacks Nezuko from behind, only for his attempt to fail when Tanjiro moves her out of the way. However, the water pillar, recovering quickly, asks Tanjiro why he protected the demon, and he desperately replies that the creature is his sister. Looking at the maddened Nezuko, Tomioka questions this statement before swiftly removing the girl from her brother's grip. This is when Tanjiro attacks Tomioka, but the water pillar knocks out both Nezuko and Tanjiro. But instead of executing a demon Nezuko, he advises that Tanjiro goes to Mount Sagiri, where a man named Sakonji Urokodaki will take the pair of them in. During his venture to Mount Sagiri, he would fend off against a demon, and his journey in training to become a demon slayer would begin, whilst Nezuko goes on to take a very lengthy nap, which would last 2 years. The year is officially 1913, and this would commence Kyojuro Rengoku's Gaiden and how he earned his spot as the Flame Hashira. The Gaiden begins with one of Muzan's demon moons devouring a demon slayer. We then switch to seeing Kyojuro Rengoku and Mitsuri Kanroji both training as Senjuro watches on. It's shown to us that Kyojuro was the one who had trained Mitsuri before the final selection exam and had given her the Demon Slayer uniform. That's when the messenger crow flies across to announce the pillar meeting, and at the time Kyojuro's father, Shinjuro Rengoku, was the Flame Hashira. Kyojuro asks his father if he is going, but his father had become a drunkard with no motivation whatsoever and having angst towards the pillars. His father tells Kyojuro that he would never become a big shot. That's when Kyojuro goes to take his father's place at the pillar meeting. Sanemi immediately realizes that Kyojuro is attending the meeting instead of his father. Sanemi intimidates Kyojuro, but that's when Kyojuro assesses the pillars and is fascinated by their pressuring aura. Ubuyashiki reveals that he had invited Kyojuro to let them know the situation with Shinjuro. Kyojuro explains how after his mother Ruka had passed away, Shinjuro has had zero will to fight and is stuck at home just drinking. The pillars realize they need his help, but if he's become a drunkard, then there is no use. That's when Kyojuro confidently shouts that he'll become the Flame Hashira. That's when Sanemi gets annoyed and strikes Kyojuro. Sanemi shouts at Kyojuro, wondering why he's not fighting him back. Kyojuro explains that hitting another fellow demon slayer is forbidden. The fact that Kyojuro had withstood Sanemi's attack had Tengen Uzui surprised. That's when Ubuyashiki tasks Kyojuro with the mission to take down one of the 12 demon moons, and if he does so, then he can become the new Flame Hashira. The mission is set in the heart of Tokyo, with Kyojuro being assisted by the other demon slayers as well as Mitsuri Kanroji. A bomb suddenly goes off in one of the buildings. This is when the demon makes his appearance, shooting just past Mitsuri. Kyojuro uses his first form on this demon, but it seems as Kyojuro is approaching the demon, it mistakes him for his father. However, Kyojuro tells him that he has no clue who he is. As this is going on, another bomb is set off in the opposite direction. That's when this demon reveals the multiple guns appearing from his body, which would be his blood demon arts. After a bit of fighting, Kyojuro uses his fourth form and manages to get his blade stuck into the demon moon's neck. However, that's when this demon lets off a bomb. With Mitsuri on the opposite side, she is distracted and then attacked by the same demon who is regenerating. That would be the demon moon who had escaped the blast through his regenerative nature and aimed his gun at Mitsuri's head. That's when Kyojuro rises back from the dead and proceeds to use his fifth form, with blood dripping down his head, as he also stands before this demon moon. This demon moon unleashes his true blood demon arts, and that would be called Plunder Cavity Shadow Wolf. With wolves appearing with built-in guns from their mouths, Kyojuro defeats the wolves, and as he approaches the demon moon, we notice a flashback with this same demon and Kyojuro's father, as he was endlessly slicing him. In fear, this demon sees Kyojuro and understands that he's the exact same as his father. This demon pulls out its last resort, which would be a minigun, dashing attacks head on to Kyojuro, but he withstands them all. This demon goes into its final form, which would be a massive wolf, as he reveals that his name is Hyro, and that he will slay Kyojuro. With them both attacking each other at the same time, it all comes down to raw strength, but using his ninth form, Kyojuro ultimately defeats Hyro. With that coming to an end, Kyojuro is invited to the pillar meeting and now becomes the Flame Hashira. The year is still 1913, which would mean we'll get to find out the true backstory of Mitsuri Kanroji and her journey in becoming the Love Pillar. When Mitsuri was a baby, she had a unique muscle composition, shocking even her mother, who herself was known for her strength. She grew up eating much more than the average person and developed an unnatural hair color, as resulting of eating too much sakura mochi, which led to her being seen as a freak and unable to proceed with a previously intended marriage when she was 17. After this rejection, she dyed her hair black, pretended to be weak, and forced herself to eat a normal amount in an attempt to fit in more with the other girls, even if it negatively impeded her well-being. Shortly after making these adjustments to her physical appearance, Mitsuri was approached by a potential partner. However, she became doubtful over whether or not pretending to be a different person would truly work out for her in the end. At some point, her partner left her or she left him. Mitsuri then encountered Kagaya Ubuyashiki, who told her to reject normalcy and embrace who she was, as her strength was a gift. Because of this encounter, she joined the Demon Slayers and used their skill and ridiculous strength to rise to the status of Hashira. While in the core, she also adopted her idea of finding a man stronger than her to marry. However, this did not work out because, with the exception of her fellow Hashira, she was much stronger and more skilled than the rest of her fellow members. She began working with Kyojuro Rengoku, and in a battle she developed her own breath, the Breath of Love, and eventually became the Love Hashira for her incredible abilities. Now back to the actual dates, but now we'll be diving into the main events of Demon Slayer. So fast forward a year later, in January 1915, this is when the final selection exam would take place for the next potential Demon Slayers in line. So with Tanjiro's treacherous training during those 2 years, where he managed to slice the boulder and train under Sabito's spirit, the day of the final selection exam couldn't come sooner. There is no indication of how regularly final selections are held, with the sheer amount of rank and file members and how fast they get killed off. I assume the final selections are held multiple times a year. Tanjiro arrives at Mount Fujikasane and gathers around with the other contestants. A young boy with black hair and a young girl with white hair walk in and explain that demons hate wisteria flowers, which grow abundantly in this area. From this point on, there would be no more wisteria, and demons captured by the core roamed free. Their trial is very straightforward: survive for 7 days. With determination, Tanjiro and the others march ahead. 2 demons immediately start assaulting Tanjiro, but he quickly smells the opening thread while avoiding their advances and seizes the opportunity to decapitate both in a single strike. Urokodaki had bestowed upon Tanjiro a special sword called the Nichirin Blade, which at the decapitation of the demon would crumble its corpse, preventing it from regenerating and effectively killing it. Tanjiro smells a rotten scent when praying for the souls of the demons he had just killed. Advancing closer to the center of the scent, Tanjiro finds a fellow contestant running away from a giant demon with several hands swirled over its body. The demon tries to kill the contestant, but Tanjiro pushes himself to act and unleashes the water-breathing second form, Water Wheel. Saving the boy, the demon recognizes Tanjiro as an Urokodaki student by his fox mask. The demon questions Tanjiro regarding current affairs to establish which period of time he was in. Upon discovering 47 years had passed since his capture by the hands of Urokodaki during his time in the Demon Slayer Corps in the Edo period, the demon becomes furious. The contestant refutes such a fact, stating that no demon there should be that old. However, the demon replies that not only had he survived for so long, he had also killed 50 people in his life, including 13 students of Urokodaki, referring to Sabito and Makomo, and implying Tanjiro would be the 14th. Tanjiro recalls Urokodaki teaching him that the strength level of a demon is proportional to the number of humans it had eaten. Tanjiro notes his sense of smell had developed to the point where he can detect the strength level of a demon by its decaying scent, explaining the rotten smell felt before. As the demon starts describing how it killed both Sabito and Makomo, Tanjiro starts breathing heavily. In an angry response, he charges at the demon, slicing several of his arms, but is hit by a hook punch on his rib cage and thrown in the nearby tree. Tanjiro hears a call to awaken from one of his deceased brothers while unconscious, regaining consciousness in the nick of time and dodging the demon's onslaught. Shortly retaliating, Tanjiro cuts more arms, but realizes that no matter how many arms he cuts off, more would grow. Tanjiro suddenly leaps very high in response to smelling the demon's hands underground. Whilst in midair, the demon tries to take advantage and strike him down, but Tanjiro uses an improvised headbutt in defense, rolling forwards and positioning himself in range of the demon's head. Tanjiro uses the water-breathing first form, Water Surface Slash, and decapitates the demon, contrary to the demon's belief that Tanjiro would feel disdain towards its existence. The young swordsman feels sorrow holding the hand of the demon while its corpse crumbled, praying for God not to let it become a demon again when it reincarnates. Tanjiro thinks to himself that all children trained under Urokodaki that perished could be at ease now. On the morning of the 7th day, Tanjiro and 3 other contestants are congratulated for having survived the trial. One fellow contestant seems aloof, another is still frightened about the trial he had just passed, and the last one questions about when they would get their official Nichirin blades. The 2 children from the start of the test introduced the Demon Slayer uniforms and the ranking system, ranging from the lowest to highest rank, in which the final selection survivors were of the lowest. A Kasugai Crow is provided, which would fulfill the task of the following new Demon Slayers at all time for communication purposes, and a crow lands on Tanjiro's shoulder. Out of impatience for receiving his blade, survivor Genya Shinazugawa hits Kanata Ubuyashiki, one of the spokespersons. This prompts Tanjiro to roughly grab his arm and ask for him to calm down. The boy does not comply and Tanjiro breaks his arm in the process. Sometime later, Tanjiro climbs down Mount Fujikasane, feeling a wave of weariness, his body in pain from the fatigue he had just sustained from the trial, also walking down with the new uniform appearing too heavy for him to carry. Tanjiro is troubled by his emotions for not being able to hold a conversation with any of the demons before killing them, and thus losing the chance to ask about a way to turn a demon back to a human. A weary, grimy and bandage-covered Tanjiro, using a stick as a crutch, eventually arrives back at Urokodaki's house. As he makes his way towards the entrance, he suddenly hears the front door being knocked down from inside. Nezuko walks out the house, much to Tanjiro's surprise of the awakening from her slumber. Tanjiro tries to reach her but falls to the ground out of exhaustion. Nezuko immediately picks him up and embraces him as Tanjiro starts crying out of relief. In the tenderness of the moment, Urokodaki appears and embraces both of them, weeping out of happiness that Tanjiro came back alive. 15 days later, Tanjiro sees the entrance of the house of a man with a large woven hat, with floral wind chimes hanging from it, covering his face. The man tells Tanjiro that he is called Haganezuka, and he had forged the blade which would be used by Tanjiro. The young boy also introduces himself, inviting Haganezuka to come into the house and have tea, but is ignored and the swordsmith sits on the ground, unwrapping the Nichirin blade. Haganezuka explains to Tanjiro the origins of the Nichirin blade forging. Tanjiro still shows concern about Haganezuka being on the floor, as his belongings would get muddy, but he is again ignored. Haganezuka suddenly lifts his head towards Tanjiro, revealing the Hyotoko mask he wore, similar to Urokodaki's mask. Once Haganezuka realizes Tanjiro had red hair and eyes, he calls him Child of Brightness, much to Tanjiro's confusion. Inside the house, Haganezuka explains that the blade changes color after being pulled from the scabbard, hinting that by Tanjiro's features, he might finally see a blade turning bright red. Tanjiro unsheathes the sword and the blade turns black. Much to the frustration of Haganezuka, Urokodaki comments on how he had never seen this shade of black, and Haganezuka jumps on Tanjiro, blaming him for not receiving the chance to see a red blade. Tanjiro's crow alerts him to go on his first mission to hunt demons. The year and date is still January of 1915, with Tanjiro facing off against his first task as a demon slayer, and that is against a swamp demon. Tanjiro equips himself with a standard demon slayer uniform under his checkered Hayori. Sakonji explains to his pupil that the outfit he is wearing was made from a special kind of fiber. The fabric is designed to be breathable, moisture repelling and non-flammable. It is strong enough to withstand low-level demon fangs and talons. As for Tanjiro's Nichiren blade, it is stated that not much is known about its unique properties since not many people wield black swords. However, it is implied that few black blade wielders have managed to survive as long as others. Tanjiro brushes it off, since he's going to do everything in his power to revert his sister to a human again, regardless of what color blade he had. To ease his travels, Urokodaki gives Tanjiro a large custom-made box for Nezuko to rest in during the day, handcrafted out of using an extremely light wood called Kirikuma Cedar and coated with rock lacquer to reinforce the exterior and durability. He also mentions his theory that Nezuko sleeps as a way to restore her energy instead of eating human flesh like other demons. Tanjiro expresses his gratitude to his master and proceeds to instruct Nezuko to enter the box. Right before Tanjiro disembarks on its journey as a demon slayer, Urokodaki straightens his pupil's clothes and bids him farewell. Tanjiro travels to the town and hears about the disappearances of young girls every night, eventually meeting a man named Kazumi, who was present during the disappearance of his fiancée, Satoko. He brings Tanjiro at the spot where Satoko vanished, and Tanjiro detects the smell of a demon. Later that night, Tanjiro would detect the very same smell and to be on the hunt for this demon. He knew that the scent was coming from underground, as he then faces off against the swamp demon, who is able to clone himself. Long story short, Tanjiro defeats the swamp demon and demands to know the location of Muzan, but out of fear he refuses to. That's when the swamp demon regenerates its arms and grabs Tanjiro, to which he simply just beheads the swamp demon, putting an end to him. At the beginning of February 1915, Tanjiro and Nezuko made their way down to Asakusa for their next mission. However, that's when Tanjiro recognizes the scent which had killed his family. He tails this scent and comes to meet the Demon King Muzan, who then decides to cause chaos by turning one of the civilians into a demon to prevent Tanjiro from getting any closer. Muzan then decides to leave the crime scene as he goes on to remember the famous Hanafuda earrings that Tanjiro was wearing. That's when Tamayo and Yushiro make their first appearance, as Tamayo uses her blood demon arts to distract the police so that she could speak to Tanjiro. That's when Tanjiro and Nezuko make their way to Tamayo's residence with the assistance of Yushiro. Tamayo explains how she was able to escape the curse of Muzan and altered her body so that she doesn't rely on human flesh to survive, as Yushiro and Tamayo only need to drink blood to survive. This is when Muzan orders his demons Susumaru and Yahaba to hunt and kill the boy with the Hanafuda earrings. They infiltrate Tamayo's residence, but through sheer willpower and ability, both Nezuko and Tanjiro manage to hold them off, with Tamayo giving them the finishing blows. That's when they head to the house's basement just before sunrise, with Nezuko hugging Tamayo and patting Yushiro's head. This is when the crow then assigns Tanjiro another mission straight after, as he and Nezuko set off. The date is now between the end of February to the beginning of March in 1915, where Tanjiro goes on to meet his fellow close friends Zenitsu and Inosuke. As he makes his way down to the mission, he comes across a boy with blonde hair seemingly harassing a girl. Tanjiro intervenes and comes to learn that this boy's name is Zenitsu, and he is also a fellow demon slayer. They were both assigned to the same mission, heading to a mansion hidden in the forest. That's when they come across two children known as Shoichi and Teruko. They were both terrified, explaining how their brother was taken into the mansion by a monster. Zenitsu goes on to hear a Suzumi drum. The sound of the drums get louder until someone is launched outside the mansion, appearing to have been killed. The two children identify that the person is not their brother, so Tanjiro leaves Nezuko in the box outside with Shoichi and Teruko and advises them not to enter the mansion. However, they were terrified because they heard scratching from inside the box and entered the mansion regardless. That is when the drum demon appears. Tanjiro begins to understand his blood demon arts, which allows him to change the position and rotation of the rooms with every hit he makes on the Suzumi drums attached to him. That's when Inosuke appears, seeming enticed to kill the drum demon. But what takes place next is Tanjiro finding the brother named Kiyoshi and eventually defeating the drum demon. This arc also revealed to us the insane sleeping ability of Zenitsu when he had defeated the demon in just a single slash. This part of the story ends with Zenitsu protecting the box and the three becoming close whilst recovering at a hot spring. We are now into the month of March in 1915. This would commence the memorable Natagumo Mountain Arc. The trio would be tasked to take down the Spider Demon family, which consists of the Lower Moon 5, Rui. Throughout this arc, we would develop our main characters further and give them an experience which would elevate their own abilities. Tanjiro takes down the Spider Mother Demon, and shortly after, Tanjiro and Inosuke see themselves coming up against the Spider Father Demon. However, Tanjiro is launched far away into the forest by this demon, making it a 1v1 between Inosuke and the father. Inosuke struggles to do any damage to this demon, but that's until Tomioka arrives, the water pillar, as he kills this demon effortlessly and ties up Inosuke. Simultaneously, Zenitsu would be taking on the spider demon's son. When encountering him, Zenitsu is terrified of spiders and climbs up a tree. He's so scared that he passes out, but during this phase, it would mean hell on earth for this spider demon, with Zenitsu absolutely washing and defeating this spider demon in his sleep state. Being poisoned by the spider demon, Zenitsu is paralyzed, but is luckily saved by the insect pillar, Shinobu Kocho. Anywho, this would also mean Tanjiro's battle against the Lower Moon 5, Rui. It would be the very first time Tanjiro faced off against such a powerhouse. Although the battle was one-sided, Tanjiro had awoken his Hinokami Kagura technique for the first time. Rui would tie up Nezuko using his threads, but that wouldn't be enough to hold her back. Nezuko uses her special flames to destroy the threads, whilst Tanjiro uses the Hinokami technique for the first time, just about slicing Rui's head off. But through using his threads, Rui reattached his head. Tanjiro believed his victory was certain. That's until Tomioka appears and kills the Lower Moon 5 in seconds using his 11th form, Dead Calm. This then leads to the death of Rui. However, Tanjiro and Nezuko would be summoned to the pillar meeting to discuss Nezuko's nature and if she should be allowed to live as a demon. The pillar meeting is then announced immediately, which would mean it takes place in March of 1915. This would be when Ubuyashiki would discuss and decide the outcome of Tanjiro and Nezuko's fate. Since it is forbidden to keep any form of demons alive, a majority of the pillars are against the idea of Nezuko remaining alive. So much so that Tsunemi decides to test Tanjiro's patience, and that is by slashing the box which has Nezuko inside of. Surprisingly, through sheer willpower, Tanjiro had headbutted Tsunemi, but that's when Ubuyashiki comes to terms with the situation and allows Nezuko to live on, whilst Tanjiro, Inosuke, Zenitsu and Nezuko are sent to the butterfly estate to recover under the supervision from the insect pillar, Shinobu Kocho. Between the months of March till April, this would be when Tanjiro, Inosuke and Zenitsu would recover and undergo training from the girls. During this period, the trio would work on their breathing technique and get back to full recovery. This is also when Tanjiro meets Kanao Suyuri and they become close friends. The date is officially April of 1915. This is when we'll be introduced to one of the most tragic arcs in all of Demon Slayer, and that would be the Mugen Train Arc. For those who have seen the movie, you know exactly where I'm going with this, so I'll quickly summarize it. The trio are assigned to another mission where they head for the train and cross paths with the Flame Pillar, Kyojuro Rengoku. He was assigned to take down a mysterious demon who had infiltrated the train, but this would also be the same time that Muzan would give Enmu more blood and to hunt down the boy wearing the Hanafuda earrings. This whole situation turns to Enmu's blood demon arts, manipulating a majority of the passengers to fall into a dream state where he could kill them. Enmu used a few innocent people to his advantage and forced them to attach a thread to our main characters whilst they slept. This would grant them access inside of their dreams and kill them for good. However, they were able to overpower this, waking them all up and realizing the situation has turned dark. Kyojuro takes it upon himself to save the passengers, whilst Tanjiro and Inosuke defeat Enmu. With all the passengers luckily rescued and Tanjiro on the brink of death, the Upper Moon 3 Akaza appears. He goes toe to toe with Kyojuro, seeing that he has so much potential and offers him to become a demon. He realizes Kyojuro's strength, and for an Upper Moon 3, Akaza was struggling till the very end. Unfortunately, this would cost Kyojuro's life, with Akaza escaping his grasp in fear of the sunlight. Akaza then meets with Muzan right after, to which Muzan gives him a stern talking to, which Akaza trembles in fear. The Demon Slayers arrive at the scene, and the announcement of Kyojuro's death is passed on to the remaining Hashira. The months are now between April till July. This is how long it takes for Tanjiro, Inosuke and Zenitsu to recover from their battle against Enmu in the Butterfly Estate. They would be training yet again, however this would also be when Tengen Uzui turns up to take the girls with him for a mission to recover his wives from the entertainment district and to also take down a mysterious demon. But that's when the trio decide to take this mission on instead of risking the girls, where they now have to dress up in drag and work alongside the sound pillar. The dates now span between July till August of 1915. This is because when they had set out into the entertainment district, it was during a much warmer climate. Anyways, what events unfold during the entertainment district arc? Well, Tanjiro, Inosuke and Zenitsu have been assigned to infiltrate different geishas, but unfortunately for Zenitsu's case, he would find himself under the care of Daki, but he would be caught. That's when Daki understands there's been an infiltration and vows to kill and eat her enemies. Daki then confronts Tanjiro, however he had managed to cut through her sashes with his Hinokami Kagura technique. This surprises Daki since her sashes are impossible to cut through, but she then hits Tanjiro with an attack launching him away, leaving Tanjiro in a vulnerable position. Luckily for him though, Inosuke intervenes and tries to slash her neck, but it comes in the form of her sash. But with Tanjiro and Inosuke on the back foot, right behind Daki appears Nezuko, who kicks a chunk of her head off. Nezuko then uses her flames to burn her, and when Daki is just about to give a treacherous blow, Tengen Uzui steps in and beheads Daki. However, that would not be the end of it. Her older brother Gyutaro emerges from her body. This is when we get to see a spectacle of a battle between the Sound Hashira and the Upper Moon 6. Zenitsu returns with the trio facing off against Daki as Tengen takes on Gyutaro by himself. The result of this battle would have both Daki and Gyutaro beheaded, the trio and Tengen Uzui having life-threatening injuries, but Nezuko uses her flames to heal them. But before sunrise hits, the three then fall unconscious due to their injuries. Tanjiro would then spend 2 months in a coma in the butterfly state. Since Tanjiro had woken up from his coma, it's now October of 1915. This would commence the Swordsmith Village Arc, as it begins with the famous Upper Moon meeting. Akaza gets into an altercation with Doma, but Kokushibo intervenes and strikes fear into the Upper Moon 3. Muzan informs them that he has been far too soft on them, and begins to put pressure on the Upper Moons since Gyutaro had died. This would be the same time when Tanjiro wakes up, but finds out his sword was destroyed yet again. Tanjiro requests if he can go to the village where Nichiren blades are cultivated in order to restore his own one. He is then granted permission to go out, but he's carried by a Kakushi and is covered so he doesn't know its location. Tanjiro ends up meeting with the village chief, and he explains that Hotaru, the swordsmith for Tanjiro's Nichiren blade, had gone and disappeared. But the chief says how he's been doing that ever since he was young whenever he had a tantrum. Kotetsu, an apprentice, gives Tanjiro a tour of the village. He then comes across both Mitsuri and Genya, but Genya tells him not to talk to him. Mitsuri then tells Tanjiro how proud she is of them since they defeated an Upper Moon. She also reveals that the village has a secret towards making him stronger. The following morning, Tanjiro would come across the mist pillar Muichiro Tokito in the woods. He finds Kotetsu arguing with Muichiro that he wouldn't give him some sort of key. Tanjiro then figures out the key is to fight against a mechanical doll that Kotetsu's ancestors had created called Yoriichi Type 0, but Kotetsu is afraid it'll get destroyed any moment against Muichiro since it's quite old. Kotetsu allows Tanjiro to train with it and tells Tanjiro to become stronger than Muichiro since he doesn't really like him that much. Tanjiro gets to work with Yoriichi Type 0, but gets knocked out instantly. After days of training against it, Tanjiro began to get used to it. Tanjiro manages to flip over the doll and behead Yoriichi Type 0. Inside they find a sword. Hotaru appears out of nowhere and vows to fix the sword for Tanjiro. Later that night, an empty vase would be left out in the open, and we would witness the Upper Moon 5 Gyokko infiltrate the Swordsmith village, as well as Hantengu the Upper Moon 4. Whilst Tanjiro and Muichiro were having a conversation, an old ugly man crawls right through into their room. Muichiro immediately senses danger and strikes, but with them attacking it ends up with Hantengu's unique blood demon arts taking place and splitting himself into 6 different clones. Genya also joins the battle by shooting one of them. With Muichiro having been launched away into the forest, he goes head to head with Gyokko, but Muichiro is then trapped inside of a water prison. As this is happening, Tanjiro is taking on one of Hantengu's clones, but through Muzan's memories, they see the mirror image of Yoriichi with Tanjiro. Hantengu's clones are then defeated and vice versa, with Gyokko as Muichiro escapes the water prison to put an end to him. And he also awakens his Demon Slayer mark, with Mitsuri awakening hers. Tanjiro also gains access to the see-through world, successfully killing Hantengu. As sunrise approaches, they begin to panic to get Nezuko under shelter, but it's too late. However, it's revealed that Nezuko had just become the very first demon becoming immune to sunlight. Muzan appears in his child form and is excited at the fact that there is finally a demon who has conquered the sun. The date is now November of 1915. This is when the pillar training arc begins. The whole purpose of this training would be for the other pillars to awaken their marks since they are the first Hashira to do so since the Golden Generation. They then began the pillar training, explaining it as the calm before the storm, since the upper moons have begun appearing more frequently, meaning Muzan could make his long-awaited appearance at some point. Tamayo is then invited to head to the butterfly estate, to which she is in complete shock and surprise. During this time, Tamayo and Shinobu come up with a serum which could be the end of Muzan and many other upper moons. With a majority of the training going well with the main characters, Muzan visits Ubuyashiki in his dying state. Ubuyashiki taunts Muzan with his dying words, leaving Muzan frustrated. That's when the crows are sent out to all the Hashira and nearby demon slayers that an attack has occurred at the Ubuyashiki residence. The final arc of Demon Slayer takes place at the beginning of December 1915, with the pillars rushing to the Ubuyashiki residence and finding that an explosion had just gone off. Muzan realized that Ubuyashiki had blown himself up and added spikes into the blast to slow down his regeneration. That's when Tamayo strikes and traps him into even bigger spikes. Himejima shortly arrives and attacks Muzan. The pillars then arrive with them all just about to synchronize their breathing forms. However, luckily for Muzan, beneath him appears the Infinity Fortress. That's when they all get sucked in and separated. The first battle in this final arc that we'll be diving into is Shinobu vs Doma. As she encounters Doma feeding on young girls, Doma recognizes Shinobu's Hayori as he remembers how regretful he felt not being able to eat her sister Kanai due to the sun rising. That's when the insect Hashira swiftly launches an attack at him, using her insect breathing, Dance of the Bee Sting, True Flutter to inflict a powerful stab directly in Doma's right eyeball, which impresses him since he states he couldn't block it with his hand in time. He then unleashes his Blood Demon art, Frozen Lotus, towards Shinobu, with her backflipping away from this attack. Although he is initially dismissive of her, since he correctly guessed that she lacks the physical strength to cut off a demon's head, he becomes excited upon learning that Shinobu's strength lies in poisoning her opponents. Shinobu hopes that the poison will be effective enough to kill him, but then learns, much to her disappointment, that Doma had already received information regarding her poison from her battle against the daughter spider demon of the spider family. Doma manages to break down and render her poison non-lethal, healing himself from her attack. She is further backed into a corner due to Doma now rapidly developing antibodies and adjusting his body against her poison, so that after a mere 5 slashes and injections of poison, he is now resistant to it entirely. Also, due to his Blood Demon art of Frozen Mist, it's becoming increasingly difficult for Shinobu to breathe. Now hedging on her bets on injecting a large dose to kill him by using a 6-stab attack, Shinobu strikes him using her insect breathing, Dance of the Dragonfly, Compound Eye Hexagon, and successfully hits him. However, as she attacks him, he simultaneously attacks her, cutting both her collarbone and ribs and puncturing one of her legs. Finally nearing her wit's end and almost losing any hope of victory, Shinobu attempts to draw strength from replaying her older sister's words of encouragement in her head. Shinobu then prepares to strike at Doma again, despite her serious injuries and immense pain she was in, and attacks him using her insect-breathing Dance of the Centipede, 100-legged zigzag to confuse him. She strikes Doma directly through his neck, impaling him and sending him flying towards the ceiling. Exhausted and wounded, Shinobu is triumphant, seeing Doma being poisoned and seemingly dying from her attack. However, Doma recovers almost instantly from her attack, by which Shinobu is further enraged. Now exhausted, fatally injured, and dangerously near death, Shinobu is caught by Doma as they fall down from the ceiling. He embraces her in a bear hug and begins mocking her and calling her entire attempt to defeat him a waste of effort, assuring her she will live peacefully as a part of him, and mockingly asking for her last words. She spitefully curses him as he begins to kill her. She is then absorbed by Doma just when Kanao arrives. The next battle would be Zenitsu vs Kaigaku, to which Zenitsu meets his former partner who had turned into a demon for the first time in such a long time. Zenitsu, with a serious look on his face, doesn't need to enter his sleep state anymore as he goes on to obliterate the new Upper Moon 6. Following this would be one of the best battles so far in Demon Slayer, and that is Tanjiro and Tomioka vs Akaza. As Tanjiro and Tomioka make their way through the Infinity Fortress, right before them appears the Upper Moon 3 Akaza. As Akaza advances, Tanjiro dodges his punch and uses the Hinokami Kagura Fire Wheel on Akaza, and with considerable effort, he severs the upper rank's arm. As Tanjiro tries to recover, Akaza attempts to behead Tanjiro with a back fist punch, to which he dodges and counters with the Hinokami Kagura Fake Rainbow, managing to create a long cut on Akaza's face. Looking at this fight, Tomioka is quite amazed and surprised by Tanjiro's sudden and quick improvement, comparing his abilities to that of a Hashira. Akaza remembers Kyojiro's words about Tanjiro not being weak and accepts it as a fact, deciding to acknowledge him by activating his technique development, Destructive Death, Compass Needle, and indicating the start of the real battle. Tomioka enters the fight immediately using the water-breathing third form flowing dance. Akaza is instantly impressed, as it had been 50 years since he ran into a water Hashira. He uses his Destructive Death Disorder, a flurry of punches that produce giant shockwaves, which Tomioka negates using his own creation, water-breathing 11th form Dead Calm. Akaza remarks that he had never seen this technique used by the previous water Hashira that he last fought. While Tanjiro tries attacking from behind using the Hinokami Kagura Raging Sun, Akaza appears from behind and attempts a backhand chop, but Tomioka cuts his attacking hand with the water-breathing second form, Water Wheel. As Tomioka attacks the upper moon, Tanjiro tries to trip Akaza by using the Hinokami Kagura Flame Dance on his legs. However, he is countered by his Destructive Death leg type, Crown Splitter. Even though Tanjiro is able to block the technique, he is hit hard enough to spit blood. Akaza continues to battle Tomioka and is impressed by the Hashira's swordsmanship. Tomioka refuses and Akaza replies that he would ask again and again and kicks him with the Destructive Death leg type, Explosive Flurry, launching him through various walls to another side of the castle. Akaza figures out the water Hashira's name after Tanjiro shouts for him when he is blasted away by Akaza's previous attack. Tanjiro and Akaza attack each other with the Hinokami Kagura, Burning Bones, Summer Sun and Destructive Death, 8-layered Demon Core respectively. Akaza praises Tanjiro's improvement and claims that Kyojiro did an amazing job, pleased with his death. This enrages Tanjiro and prompts Akaza to give his philosophy of how he hates the weak and wishes that they were eliminated. Tanjiro retorts by saying that even Akaza was once a child and that someone had helped him. He continues by stating that the strong should aid the weak, and he wouldn't let Akaza do as he pleased any further. Tanjiro's words shakes Akaza as he feels restless memories of Kaizo appear, saying to him the same words. Akaza brushes it off and realizes it was but a hallucination. Angered by this, he claims Tanjiro to be unpleasant and uses his Destructive Death, Crushing type, 10,000 Leaves, Flashing Willow, and becomes much faster as Tanjiro attempts to dodge. The demon surprises Tanjiro and kicks him with his Destructive Death, Leg type, Flying Planet 1000 Wheels, making him cough up more blood. He compares Akaza's precision to that of a magnetic compass and begins to think and deduce using the demon's moves and words. Tanjiro dodges another kick by Akaza and attacks him with the Hinokami Kagura Solar Heat Haze. Akaza manages to avoid the technique, however a considerable portion of his neck is sliced and he expresses amazement. Asking Tanjiro how he swung his blade, Tanjiro attempts to use the Hinokami Kagura dance, but the sword is clasped in Akaza's hand and he attempts to break it. Tanjiro uses headbutts and kicks, trying to make Akaza loosen his grip despite the demon not budging. Luckily his hands got cut by Tomioka, angry about the deadly kick Akaza gave him previously. Tomioka's senses awaken and a mark appears on his face. He easily dodges a shockwave punch and gives a quick slice of his own. Akaza dodges, but the attack slicks a small portion of his neck. The demon acknowledges the increase in speed as Tomioka surprises him with a sudden water-breathing fourth form, Striking Tide, vertically slicing Akaza's right arm. Tanjiro notices that Akaza has matched Tomioka's speed and wonders how Akaza's attacks are so accurate. He suddenly remembers words from Akaza and Inosuke Hashibira, the latter explaining how he's able to sense killing intent and how he cannot detect people behind him if they have no killing intent. Meanwhile, Tomioka and Akaza fight on equal ground, with Akaza having fully adapted to Tomioka's speed. Tanjiro attempts to use a Hinokami Kagura dance, who tries to use a back fist strike which is dodged by Tanjiro. Using his opportunity, Tomioka attacks the upper moon. Tanjiro gets a grasp about the truth behind Akaza's techniques. As the fight between Tomioka and Akaza goes on, Tanjiro remembers the time with his father, Tanjiro Kamado, explains to him about the correct breath and movements and about being able to see the transparent world, which one can achieve if the mind becomes invisible. He demonstrates by killing a bear while showing no killing intent. Tanjiro manages to achieve this state for a short moment in time when Akaza attacks him, closing off other senses and focusing on dodging. Akaza and Tomioka are battling fiercely, trading blows to each other. The Water Hashira has used up all its forms during the fight, and Akaza proclaims that it will be the end of the Hashira, and being amazed at how long he fought for. As Tomioka is about to attack the demon's fist, Akaza breaks Tomioka's sword by using the bell splitter technique and attempts to punch through him, but his arm is severed by Tanjiro, who had managed to enter the transparent world. The demon notes the changes and tries to kill the young slayer. Tomioka takes this moment to attack him, but Akaza uses his strongest technique development final form, blue silver chaotic afterglow. Tomioka tries to reduce it with his water breathing 11th form dead calm, but the attacks were too random and powerful to completely cancel it out, and he gets hit by many shockwaves despite managing to dodge several blows. Meanwhile, Tanjiro is able to see everything move slowly in the transparent world. Akaza is unable to notice that Tanjiro is behind him, and Tomioka hopes he goes for the neck that instant. However, Tanjiro calls the demon out and Akaza turns to strike, but Tanjiro dodges. Akaza could not detect his fighting spirit via the compass, and Tanjiro manages to decapitate Akaza with the Hinokami Kagura, setting Sun transformation. Akaza was bewildered, wondering how Tanjiro did not have any fighting spirit, comparing this feeling to fighting against a plant. He acknowledges that Tanjiro surpassed his speed. He realizes that the domain of supremacy is nothing less than the transparent world in a selfless state. He tries to attach his head back, but Tomioka with his broken sword, piercing the head, separating it from the body. His head disintegrates, but his body continues to fight, using his technique development destructive death compass needle, while his head regenerates. Tanjiro dodges his chops but is thrown aside by the demon's kick, with the main character trying to get up and fight again, but the stress and exhaustion of this fight cause him to pass out. Tomioka protects Tanjiro with the water-breathing 4th form Striking Tide, slicing the headless body in various regions, but the demon regenerates even faster. The two begin to trade blows, and although Tomioka is badly hurt, he still focuses on protecting Tanjiro, giving Akaza vague memories of Kaizo. As he advances, he was stopped by the teary-eyed spirit of his human self's deceased fiancée, Koyuki, telling him to stop. Tomioka continues to stand up despite being burdened with the desire and goal not to let his friends or family die in front of him like his sister or Sabito. Akaza was held by Koyuki's hand as his head continued to regenerate. Akaza begins to remember why he wanted to become strong and thinks back to the time when he was the demon child Hakuji. From his father's death to meeting Kaizo and Koyuki, he remembers trying to find a purpose and reason in life. His memories of his past suddenly come rushing. During this, Tanjiro manages to wake up and Akaza's head has halfway been recovered. The demon attempts to kill Tomioka with his destructive death, annihilation type, and Tanjiro rushes to stop him. But his sword slips and he punches Akaza, causing him to question his current deeds and begins to regret sullying his master's precious style. As he prepares his technique, Tanjiro tries to pull Tomioka away, but with a smile of gratitude on his face, Akaza uses a technique on himself, mutilating and pulverizing him and reducing many parts of his body to bones. Akaza admits defeat, stating that Tanjiro's technique was magnificent and that he wants to go to hell like a man. He imagines his father and Kaizo, but when he remembers Muzan asking if he wanted to get stronger, he begins to regenerate. He is stopped by Koyuki, thankful about Hakuji recovering his memories and thanking him for what he had done. Finally finding peace, Akaza disintegrates, dying as Hakuji, a loyal son, a protective student, and a faithful lover. With Tanjiro and Tomioka sealing victory, they both collapse and fall unconscious. After this would be Kanao and Inosuke facing off against Doma. With Kanao on the scene, she simply insults Doma until he has a serious look on his face. During this battle, Inosuke had arrived and was told how his mother was killed by Doma. The pair throw the kitchen sink at him until the serum kicks into Doma, making him weaker by the minute. This then allows Inosuke and Kanao to put the finishing blows on him and successfully defeating the Upper Moon too. After this would be Mitsuri and Obunai facing off against Nakime, where with the help of Yushiro, they manage to successfully overcome. Simultaneously while this is happening, Muichiro, Genya, Senemi and Himejima find themselves taking on Muzan's strongest demon, Kokushibo. This battle was very one-sided, with Kokushibo obliterating the pillars with ease. However, with the intervention of Himejima and Senemi, they all combined their attacks to break Kokushibo, as he was also conflicted by his past, causing him to step back and let himself be killed, even though he could have regenerated regardless of his head being sliced clean off. The final part of this climactic arc would be when the Infinity Fortress would collapse and the remaining Demon Slayers take on Muzan. To break it down, Muzan enters a form which screams out power. The remaining pillars such as Himejima, Tomioka, Senemi, Obunai and Mitsuri try their utmost best to hold back the Demon King, but this battle would lead to a massive twist, with Nezuko returning to normal and seeking her brother. During this, Muzan is pinned by Tanjiro. He becomes a giant baby, sucking Tanjiro in and transferring himself into Tanjiro's body. With the baby Muzan obliterated by the sun, the Demon King lives on in Tanjiro. The other Demon Slayers, including Nezuko, try their best to subdue him. Fortunately, Kanao approaches Tanjiro with the serum and successfully injects him. That's when Tanjiro defeats Muzan in his subconscious and overcomes him, restoring his humanity. The Demon King Muzan is no more. 3 months later, in March of 1916, this would be when Tanjiro fully recovers from the final battle. With the Demon Slayers now being disbanded, Tanjiro, Nezuko, Inosuke and Zenitsu head back to Tanjiro's home, and that would be the end of the journey for Tanjiro Kamado. Just over 100 years later, in March of 2020, we would be revealed to the descendants of our main characters, all living their own lives peacefully, something which wasn't possible for their ancestors. Demon Slayer comes to an end with us seeing a cool photograph of Tanjiro and Ko, alongside the Hanafuda earrings which were framed onto the wall, a fitting end for an amazing series. We've managed to go through every single predicted date in this timeline video, and it was 100% worth it. There are some battles that I didn't go too into detail with, since this video would probably end up being 8 hours long, but hope you guys can now finally grasp the time period Demon Slayer took place in. So with this lengthy video completed, what did you guys make of this amazing series overall? Be sure to let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. As always, like this video and subscribe to the channel if you're new, and I'll see you all in the next one.